Hey guys, welcome back to more family drama business stories. What would you do if you built a business with your dad for over 10 years and then when he retires, he gives said business to your golden child entitled brother? Let me know in the comments, and now let's dive right into the story. And the XXL title story starts like this. Growing up, it always felt like the universe had this sick joke going, a cosmic punchline aimed squarely at my gut. You see, I was born with grease under my fingernails and a wrench in my hand, a natural-born gearhead with a sixth sense for anything with an engine. My brother Charles, though? Well, he was the golden child, the charmer, the one who could sweet-talk his way out of a paper bag and into Dad's good graces with a single dazzling smile. Our childhood was a study in contrasts, a tale of two brothers on opposite ends of the spectrum. While I spent my summers elbow deep in engine blocks learning the intricate dance of pistons and spark plugs under my dad's begrudging tutelage, Charles was off at summer camp charming the counselors and perfecting his cannonball. Don't get me wrong, my dad was not cruel, not exactly at least. He just had this blind spot, this unshakable belief that Charles, with his slicked back hair and easy confidence, was destined for greatness, while I, with my calloused hands and quiet determination, was, well, just dependable old Daniel. My dad ran a small auto repair shop, Johnson's Auto, a greasy haven of wrenches and welding torches that he had inherited from his own father. It was not much, just a 2-bay garage on the outskirts of town, but it was ours, a legacy passed down through generations of Johnsons. I practically grew up in that garage, the scent of motor oil and the rhythmic clanging of metal a comforting symphony to my ears. By the time I was 10, I could change a tire faster than most kids could ride a bike, and by 15, I was my dad's right-hand man, diagnosing engine troubles with a single glance and rebuilding carburetors in my sleep. Charles, meanwhile, treated the garage like a toxic waste dump, something to be avoided at all costs. He would show up every now and then, usually sporting a fresh tan and a bored expression, helping out by fetching Dad coffee or supervising my work with an air of condescending amusement. "You sure you know what you're doing here, Danny boy?" he would ask, leaning against a dusty tool chest, his designer sunglasses perched precariously on his nose. "Wouldn't want you messing up Mr. Henderson's precious Cadillac." I'd just ignore him, my jaw clenched tight, focusing on the task at hand. It was easier than rising to the bait, easier than letting his words, laced with a subtle but unmistakable disdain, get under my skin. After high school, I went straight to work at the garage, eager to learn more and eventually take over the family business. Charles, naturally, had other plans. He had somehow managed to charm his way into a fancy out-of-state college, his tuition paid for with Dad's hard-earned savings, and a generous helping of loans that Charles swore he would pay back tenfold once he was a big-shot lawyer. Yeah, about that. Charles' law career turned out to be about as successful as his attempts at changing a flat tire. He lasted a year at college, flunking out after spending more time at fraternity parties than in the library. He drifted from one dead-end job to another, each venture lasting only as long as his charm and Dad's dwindling patience allowed it. Through it all, I was the steady one, the one who kept Johnson's Auto afloat. I poured my heart and soul into that garage, working long hours, learning every nut and bolt, every quirk and cranny of the business. I treated our customers like family, earning their trust and loyalty with my honesty, my hard work, and my genuine love for all things automotive. Slowly but surely, I transformed Johnson's Auto from a dusty relic of a bygone era into a thriving business. I expanded our services, invested in new equipment, and even convinced my dad to let me spruce up the place with a fresh coat of paint and a new sign. Johnson & Sons Auto Repair, it proclaimed in bold red letters, a testament to my hard work and dedication. I even convinced Dad to let me add Sons to the name, a small but significant victory in my ongoing battle for his recognition. For a while, things were good, business was booming, I was finally starting to earn a decent living, and my dad even seemed proud in his own gruff, taciturn way. Then came the day that changed everything though. My dad announced his retirement. It was not entirely unexpected. He'd been talking about it for years, dreaming of trading in his ranch for a fishing rod and spending his days on the lake. But it was the way he announced it, the smug look on his face, the way he kept glancing at Charles, who had shown up unexpectedly, smelling of expensive cologne and sporting a suspiciously new suit that sent a chill down my spine. We were in the garage, the familiar scent of motor oil and the rhythmic hiss of an air compressor filling the air. My dad had called us together, a rare occurrence that usually meant something big was about to go down. "Boys," he had said, his voice gruff with emotion, "I've decided it's time for me to hang up my wrench." I'd smiled, a genuine smile, and clapped him on the shoulder. "About time, Dad, you've earned it." Charles, of course, had to chime in, his voice dripping with faux sincerity. "Congratulations, Dad, we're so proud of you." My dad had beamed, his chest puffing out like a proud rooster. "Well, sons, I've been giving it a lot of thought to the future of Johnson & Sons." He had paused, letting the silence hang heavy in the air, his gaze shifting between Charles and me. I felt a knot of unease tightening in my gut, a sense of foreboding that something was not right. And then he had dropped the bomb. "You're kidding, right?" I spat, the words catching in my throat like dry crackers. My dad, freshly retired and smelling suspiciously of expensive cologne and my brother's smug aftershave, just dropped a bomb bigger than any New Year's Eve celebration. "No, son," my dad started, his voice taking on that placating tone that usually meant he was about to screw me over. "Your brother's got a good head on his shoulders. He's got fresh ideas, new perspectives." Fresh ideas? I practically choked on the words. "Dad, I've been running Johnson & Sons Auto Repair for 10 years. 10 years of blood, sweat and more late-night engine rebuilds than I care to count, and you're handing it to Charles? The guy who thinks a carburetor is a South American bird?" My dad puffed up like a preening rooster again. "Charles got ambition, he's got vision." Vision? Charles had the vision of a mole rat in a sandstorm. The only thing he was ambitious about was finding new ways to spend Dad's money and charm his way out of responsibility. Me? I was the one who had busted my hump to turn Dad's little side hustle auto repair shop into the most respected garage in this town. "This is insane," I muttered, running a hand through my already greasy hair. This is what is best for the family business," my dad interrupted, his tone brooking no argument. Right, the family business. The one I had built while Charles was busy flunking out of college and maxing out Dad's credit cards on trips to Vegas and designer clothes he wore once before discarding. I looked at my dad, really looked at him, and saw the stubborn set of his jaw, the way his eyes crinkled at the corners when he was sure he was right, and I knew it was pointless. He had made up his mind probably after Charles had sweet-talked him with some half-baked scheme, and of course a healthy dose of flattery. "Fine," I said, my voice flat and devoid of emotion. "Do what you want, but don't come crying to me when Charles runs this place into the ground." I turned to leave, my gut churning with a toxic stew of anger, resentment and a good dose of fear. Fear for the future of the business I had poured my heart and soul into. Fear for my own future now that my inheritance had been ripped away and handed to my good-for-nothing brother. "Oh, and Daniel?" Dad called after me, his voice dripping with a condescending pity that made my blood boil. "Don't worry about yourself. You're a smart boy. You will land on your feet." I did not bother turning around, I just raised my hand in a sarcastic salute and walked out, the slam of the garage door echoing my fury. The next few years were a blur of bitterness and begrudging acceptance. I found a job at a rival garage across town, the owner a gruff but fair man named Frank who seemed to appreciate my work ethic and skills. It was not the same as running my own place, but it paid the bills and kept the roof over my head. Meanwhile, the rumors about Johnson & Sons Auto Repair started trickling in like slow leaks in a tire. Charles, in his infinite wisdom, had decided to modernize the place. Out went the tried-and-true grease-stained equipment, replaced with shiny new and utterly unnecessary gadgets that looked like they belonged on a spaceship, not fixing a busted transmission. He had also hired a bunch of his buddies, guys more interested in cracking jokes and ogling the calendar girls Charles had plastered all over the walls than actually doing any work. Customers who had been loyal to Johnson & Sons for years started taking their business elsewhere, complaining about shoddy work, inflated prices, and the general air of incompetence that now permeated the place. I watched it all happen from a distance, a mixture of grim satisfaction and a deep aching sadness twisting in my gut. I had told them, hadn't I, warned them that Charles was a walking disaster zone when it came to anything remotely mechanical. But they hadn't listened. Blinded by their favoritism and Charles' silver tongue, one evening I was elbow deep in the engine of a '67 Mustang, the sweet smell of motor oil and the rhythmic clinking of tools a familiar comfort, when Frank walked into the garage, his face grim. "Heard about your brother's place," he said, his voice gruff with sympathy. I grunted, not looking up from my work. I already knew what he was gonna say. The news had spread like wildfire through the tight-knit community of mechanics and car enthusiasts in town. Johnson & Sons Auto Repair, once a beacon of quality and reliability, had gone belly up, bankrupt, kaput. Yeah, I finally said, wiping my hands on a rag. What a shame. Frank clapped a hand on my shoulder, his grip surprisingly gentle. Don't you go blaming yourself, son. You did everything you could. Some folks just cannot see past their own noses. He was right, of course. I could not have saved Johnson & Sons not with Charles at the helm, determined to steer it straight into the ground. Still a part of me, a small stubborn part, could not help but feel a sense of regret. The weeks that followed were a strange mix of emotions. I felt a sense of vindication, of course. I'd been right all along about Charles and now everyone knew it, but there was also a lingering sadness, a sense of loss for what could have been. One rainy afternoon, I was walking home from work when I spotted a familiar figure huddled in the doorway of a closed-down bookstore, trying to shield himself from the downpour with a tattered newspaper. It was Charles. His hair, once carefully styled with expensive products, was now greasy and matted. His clothes, once designer labels, were now rumpled and stained. He looked broken. I hesitated for a moment, my gut churning with conflicting emotions. Part of me wanted to walk on, to leave him to wallow in the consequences of his actions. But another part, a softer part I tried to keep hidden under layers of resentment and anger, could not help but feel a sense of pity. "Charles?" I asked tentatively, my voice barely a whisper above the sound of the rain. He looked up, his eyes widening in recognition. He tried to scramble to his feet but stumbled, a look of shame flashing across his face. "Daniel," he mumbled, his voice hoarse. What are you doing here?" "Just passing by," I said, my voice deliberately casual. "What about you? What happened?" He looked down at his worn-out shoes, his shoulders slumping further. It's a long story. We've got time," I said, surprising even myself with the offer. He hesitated for a moment and then nodded, his gaze still fixed on the ground. We found a nearby coffee shop, the warm air thick with the aroma of roasted beans and cinnamon. We sat in a booth by the window, watching the rain lash against the glass. "I screwed up, Daniel," Charles finally said, his voice barely audible above the gentle hum of conversation and the clinking of spoons against ceramic mugs. "Yeah," I said, unable to keep the bitterness out of my voice. "You did." He sighed, running a hand through his tangled hair. Dad gave me everything. The business, the money, the house. I thought I could handle it. I thought I could be like you." I snorted. "You thought wrong." He winced but didn't argue. "I was an idiot," he continued, his voice thick with self-loathing. "I spent money like it was water. I hired my friends even though they didn't know a wrench from a screwdriver. I just wanted to have fun, to be the cool boss, the one everyone liked. And look where it got you," I said, unable to keep the smugness out of my voice. He looked up at me then, his eyes filled with a raw pain that startled me. "I lost everything, Daniel. The business, the house, Dad's respect, just everything." He paused, his gaze dropping back down to his hands. "I even lost my fiancée. She couldn't handle being with a failure." I stared at him, my anger slowly draining away, replaced by a grudging empathy. I'd hated him, yes, resented him for his carelessness, his entitlement, his ability to charm his way into Dad's good graces. But seeing him now, broken and defeated, stripped of his arrogance and bravado, I couldn't help but feel a flicker of sympathy. "What are you gonna do now?" I asked, my voice softer than it had been in months. He shrugged, his shoulders slumped with defeat. "I don't know. I've applied for jobs, but no one wants to hire a guy who bankrupted his own family business." He looked up at me again, a flicker of hope in his eyes. "What about you, Daniel? You're doing well, right?" "Frank's place is doing great, I hear." "Yeah," I said, a strange tightness in my chest. "Frank's a good guy, he knows what he's doing." We sat in silence for a moment, the only sound the gentle patter of rain against the window pane. I took a sip of my coffee, the bitter liquid doing little to soothe the knot of tension in my gut. "You know," I finally said, my voice hesitant, "I've been thinking about opening my own shop." His head snapped up, his eyes widening. "You have?" "Yeah," I said, a slow grin spreading across my face. "I've got some money saved up and I know a guy who knows a guy who's selling some used equipment. It's a bit of a fixer-upper, but…" I trailed off, my mind racing with possibilities. For years I dreamt of running my own place and of building something from the ground up, something that was mine, free from the legacy of Johnson & Sons and the shadow of my brother's failures. "But what?" Charles asked, his voice eager. "But I could use a hand," I said, meeting his gaze. "Someone who knows the ins and outs of the business, someone who's learned from their mistakes." A slow smile spread across his face, the first genuine smile I had seen from him in months. You would really give me a chance?" Don't get any ideas, I said, my voice gruff, even though I couldn't quite suppress the smile tugging at the corners of my lips. This is not about forgiveness or forgetting, this is business. He nodded, his eyes shining with gratitude. I understand, I will work my tail off, Daniel, you won't regret this. And you know what? He did. He worked harder than I'd ever seen him work before, his eagerness to prove himself, to atone for his past mistakes, evident in every task he tackled. It was not always easy. There were arguments, disagreements, moments when I wanted to throttle him for his impulsiveness, his tendency to jump into things without thinking. But there were also moments of genuine camaraderie, of shared laughter and hard-won victories as we built our business brick by brick, oil change by oil change. We called it Walker Auto, a nod to our shared history, to the road we had both traveled to get to this point. It was not Johnson & Sons, the gleaming monument to Dad's favoritism and Charles' failures. No, it was ours, and it thrived. Word spread about the new kids in town, the brothers who were good with their hands and even better with their customers. We built a reputation for honesty, reliability, and a genuine love for all things automotive. One sunny afternoon a few years after we had opened our doors, I was in the office going over the books when I heard a commotion out in the garage. I walked out to see Charles talking to a customer, his face flushed with excitement. "Daniel, come here," he called, waving me over. "You're not gonna believe who this is." I walked closer, my brow furrowed in confusion. The customer was an older gentleman, his face weathered by time and experience, his eyes twinkling with a mischievous glint. "Daniel," Charles said, his voice laced with amusement, "meet Mr. Johnson, Dad's accountant." Mr. Johnson extended a hand, his grip surprisingly strong. "Pleasure to meet you, Daniel. Your father, well, let's just say he's not doing so well these days." I raised an eyebrow, my curiosity piqued. "Oh? Seems like your brother's little mishap with the family business hit him harder than he let on," Mr. Johnson said, a sly smile playing on his lips. "He lost a good chunk of his savings trying to bail Charles out." He leaned in conspiratorially. "Word on the street is that he's had to sell the house and move in with your sister and her husband. Not exactly the golden retirement he was hoping for, right?" I couldn't help the surge of satisfaction that coursed through me. It was not that I wished ill on my father, not exactly, but there was a certain poetic justice in knowing that his blatant favoritism, his willingness to hand everything to Charles on a silver platter, had backfired spectacularly. "Well," I said, my voice carefully neutral, "life has a funny way of working things out, doesn't it?" Mr. Johnson chuckled, his eyes twinkling. "Indeed it does, Daniel, indeed it does." He clapped a hand on my shoulder. "Your father may not have seen your worth, son, but the rest of the world has. You've built something special here, something to be proud of." He turned to leave and then paused, a thoughtful expression on his face. "You know, your father always did say that you were the smart one." And with that he was gone, leaving me standing there, a strange mix of emotions swirling within me. I looked around my garage at the gleaming tools, the smell of motor oil and gasoline, the sound of Charles' laughter as he chatted with a customer. This was my life now, my business, my success, and it felt damn good. And now let's move on to the next story. It starts like this. Before I get into talking about a crappy neighbor, I want to first talk about my old neighbor who was an amazing guy. I live on a farm property, and while it is not huge, I have a nice chunk of land. The man next to me, though, had an average-sized residential plot of land. There was never an issue, to the point that we did not even bother putting up a fence to separate the properties with a barrier. I had fencing for animals, but that was about it, and we got along great. He loved buying fresh products from me, and I did not mind when he asked about being slightly on my land when he would have a party. When he moved away, I was honestly sad, and that was soon replaced by worry of who was gonna move in next. I knew that a lot of residential homeowners would not want to live next to a farm, and it could cause problems. Eventually, somebody did buy his home, and I was wary of them right away. They drove a fancy car and gave off an air to them like they were better than everybody else. I could have been judging people wrongly though, so I didn't say or do anything. I just sat and waited to see where the cards would fall. It did not take long before my bad feeling was verified that these people were not gonna get along with me. Strangely enough, it did not start with them saying anything to me, but instead around me. When they saw me, they would talk loudly about how my land smelled horrible and I was dirty. They pointed me out to their kids with comments of saying that they had to do good in school or would end up like the dirty farmer that lived next door. ever. I felt bad for the kids because I knew they could see my animals and they seemed excited about them. I once overheard the small boy asking the mom if she thought I would let him pet my cows. She told him to stay away from me and that I was dirty and probably even dangerous. Side note, he looked like a very good kid and I would have absolutely let him meet my cows. The fact that they weren't actively interacting with me made me feel like maybe things would be alright. That they were passive-aggressive jerks but were not gonna cause any actual problems. But now the story takes a weird turn away from them and onto me getting hurt. So being a farmer is usually pretty safe, but like most jobs, if you are not paying attention, you can get injured. So one day I was not looking at what I was doing and I ended up cutting my arm on some torn chicken wire. On paper, not a big deal, but I didn't actually see how deep or how bad it was, and to get on with the story and avoid graphic details, I will just say that it got infected and I ended up having to spend some time in the hospital. I had some friends going to the farm daily to feed the animals, but other than that, my farm was empty. I would like to imagine what my new neighbors did next would have happened either way, but I kind of hate myself for being in the hospital and letting it happen. I had no idea until I got a call from one of my friends saying that it looked like my neighbors were installing a fence. I did not mind, and the less I saw of them, the better. However, what my friend did not know was where the property line was and the fact that their fence was pretty deep onto my property already. I did not know any of that until I got home and saw their fence for myself. I was really angry about it because they were essentially attempting to steal a part of my property. When I say the fence was deep into my property, I just want to try and paint a little picture for you. Their new fence now put the following things on their property. So the first thing that was now part of their land was one of two sheds where I kept a lot of tools and various farming equipment, as well as about a dozen of my trees that were fruit bearing, and during certain seasons I would make profit of them. Finally was an area of land that I keep empty for reasons that I had no idea of, but it was essentially the graveyard for the family's history of pets. Many a good farm dog got put to rest there, and now they were trying to use that land for their own purpose. I have zero patience and needed stuff from my shed, so I decided to say F it and just hop over the fence and do what I had to do. My plan was actually later in the week destroying the fence completely, but I had some more important things to catch up on after being stuck in a bed for over a week. When I am in my shed going through things, I hear police sirens and then the cops coming into the shed and putting me in handcuffs. I know I was on the other side of the fence, but it was still my property, so I did not believe my neighbor would actually try and call the police on me. Speaking of my neighbor, he was yelling at the cops that I was trespassing and breaking into his shed to steal his things. A screaming match between the two of us went down, and the police dragged me off of my own property for trespassing. I know they were just doing their jobs, but they did not even listen to me saying to check the land records and see that the land was mine. The worst thing of all was the smile on my neighbor's face as I was getting dragged away. I couldn't help myself, so I shouted one last thing to my neighbor, the fact that he stole land that has pets buried underneath it. Being in the right, I filed a lawsuit against my neighbor for the illegal fence and having me removed from my own property knowingly. Not to mention attempted theft of my shed and fruit trees that he was still claiming belonged to him. He did not ever deny that it was his fence or that he chose where to have it built, just that a fence was there to divide the property and it should be evidence enough of what belongs to who. That's some elementary school logic there and not anything that could hold up in court. So the land records were checked that showed the fence was deep on my property and they were encroaching on my land. However, then their story changed to me selling and gifting them some of my land, which I denied, of course. They had no paperwork to show this, and it really didn't help that things in my shed had my name on them. Plus being farming equipment and that family clearly not having a farm. The court found in my favor and my neighbor ended up being sentenced to jail for the things that he did. Now, the woman and kids still live next to me, but since their husband went to jail, I have not been hearing a peep from her. Finally, the fence was removed and a new one put up in the correct spot, so I had my entire property back. I know that she's probably telling her kids that I'm a horrible man that got their dad sent to jail, but that's one thing I cannot worry about. And yeah, Ripe Stars OP indeed cannot worry about that, because these people should have known that if you mess with a farmer, that is exactly what will happen. I would say tough luck. If you enjoy the farmer stories, please don't forget to like the video and maybe even post some star emojis in the comments if you want to support me. The next one is titled Train Revenge. So I take the train to work each morning and then again to get home. I like to sit in the quiet car because it allows me to think and do a little extra work each day. On the train ride home today, a woman in front of me kept talking on the phone even after people nicely asked her to be quiet. The conductor also came through and informed her that she was on a quiet car. The seats we are in have very little support, so someone behind you could push your seat and you would feel it. Several riders decided it was not worth it and switched cars. I decided I had enough and slouched far enough so both of my knees were firmly in the back of her seat, pushing fairly hard. She cocked her head around and told me to put my knees down. I closed my eyes and fake slapped. She got up and moved to a different seat. Actually, there was a person behind her and guess what she did? Knees to the back of the chair. People started catching on and she chose a seat with no one behind her. Another rider changed seats behind her and she got some more knees. Then the conductor came through again and was unaware of our little revenge. She got up and told him that people were putting knees into her back and stalking her to each spot. The conductor put his index finger to his lips and said, "Shh, this is a quiet car," so she moved to a new train car. And yeah, Ripe Stars, if you have ever gotten revenge on any annoying people in public transport, please let us know in the comments because I would love to hear your story. And yeah guys, with this we have reached the end of the video. However, if you cannot get enough of my content, please don't forget to subscribe to the channel to not miss any of my daily uploads. And also check out my podcast by searching for Ripe Stories on Spotify, Amazon, Audible and other podcast platforms. You will often find exclusive episodes and early access to new content. Furthermore, please check out my Patreon by going to patreon.com/ripeyoutube or my YouTube membership program for even more exclusive stories. Thank you so much and I will see you again tomorrow.